Before beginning our trip, we meet Captain Orange, in whose care we are to place ourselves for the voyage. Captain Orange has commanded the Columbus for a number of years, and besides making 2 previous cruises with her to the Mediterranean, he has taken the Columbus twice around the world. From New York to New York, she is to be our floating home. While at sea, we keep fit with deck sports and with walks about the decks, often to the music of the band. For 6 days, we steam southward through seas where winter is quickly turned into spring, and where on the morning of the 7th day, we shall find ourselves at our first port of call. As the ship steams on, let us follow by means of a map the route that Columbus is to take. Upon coming on deck in the early morning, we find ourselves anchored in the harbor of Funchal. Many small boats have come out to welcome us. Some of them carry wares for sale, but most of them are full of shivering boys who call out to us to throw coins in the water for them to dive after. "Small boy, jump in water," calls out one. But when we throw the coin, the small boy remains dry while another gets it. But diving boys are to be common sights during our wanderings, so we leave them and hurry down the gangplank and take our place in one of the large tenders that is to carry us ashore. One young merchant has established himself in a suitable location and is vending flowers across the side of our boat. On the jetty, curious taxis await us. These heavy, gaily decorated sleds drawn by oxen add to the interest of our first port of call. The drivers all wear painted straw hats with blue bands. They walk while we ride. The pace is slow, but the experience a novel one. When the steel runners become hot, the driver throws an old greasy rag under them. It cools them and makes them slide easily. The sea furnishes the material and fashions the pavings for the streets. The only cost to the Madeirans for their picturesque thoroughfares is that of labor, and labor is very cheap in Madeira. We watch the paving of a new street. Not only passengers, but goods are carried in sleds. Here's one with a barrel of fine old Madeira wine on its way to an outbound steamer. The town and houses seem little changed from the time when Christopher Columbus lived here. They point out to us the spot where stood the little church in which he was married. The making of wicker furniture is one of Madeira's home industries. A dozen chairs and 6 tables is a real load for 2 men. Fish is plentiful and inexpensive. A species of large eel is found in abundance. They have no scales but a tough skin, which is removed by rubbing and scraping over a bench of volcanic lava stones. Unlike the practice in our own country, here the fish are first cleaned and then offered for sale. Fish is not the only seafood consumed. Live turtles are also sold in the market. Face to face with some of the types of this little Portuguese island. Madeira is a veritable garden of flowers. The subtropical climate produces a year-round abundance. Women follow us about with large baskets balanced on their heads and smilingly plead with us to buy a bunch. Embroidery work is another product of the island and costs very little. High mountains rise above Funchal. By rack and pinion railway, we shall climb almost to the top of one. While we ascend comfortably in our train, others are toiling up the steep mountainside, carrying the wicker sleds in which we are later to descend to the town. On the way up, we noticed the inexpensive method of supplying water to each house. Near the top of the mountain, we leave the train, and after a luncheon served on a spacious terrace, we take our places in the sleds which are to carry us back to Funchal. 2 or 3 men accompany each sled. They run behind us, and by means of ropes, guide us safely to the bottom. They wear the homemade shoes of Madeira. Finally settled in our seats, we start the 20-minute descent. This thrilling slide over the slippery stones of the mountain road is the climax of our day in Madeira. Soon after sunrise, on the 2nd day after leaving Madeira, we land at Casablanca, the busy modern port of French Morocco. Native merchants have set up shops for the day, displaying on the pier the typical wares of their country. Articles of camel leather tempt us, especially these cushion covers, and they offer us our first opportunity for oriental bargaining, an art we are sure to know thoroughly before the cruise is ended. The native quarter, which was the old Moroccan town of Dar el-Baida, meaning the White House, is still surrounded by the old walls built in the time of the Portuguese. But it is the French city outside the walls that is more interesting to us. In Morocco, the French have built their own cities apart from the native towns. All this modern development since their coming in 1912. Wherever the Frenchman goes, he carries with him something to create the atmosphere of his own country. So we find sidewalk cafes here, just as in Paris. From the unfinished Hassan Tower, the great landmark of Rabat, we look toward Saleh, the snow-white town across the river Bouregreg, and then back at the walled city of Rabat. This tower upon which we stand was once the minaret of a great mosque, now, excepting a few columns and fragments of masonry, entirely destroyed. The walls of old Rabat are still well preserved and efficiently separate the Arab city from the French. Here we anticipate our visit to the native bazaars, so let us wander on afoot through the narrow, busy streets within the walls. The native doctor has no office, but administers to his patients in the busy streets. He is not only the doctor, but the druggist as well, as may be seen by his supply of herbs and medicines. All business cannot be carried on in the crowded street, but when shops are only about the size of piano boxes, some of them are bound to overflow. The butcher isn't bothered much about ice, nor the restaurateur about service. Drinking water is still carried in skins, which are washed and filled at the fountains the French have placed within the city. Refreshing the thirsty. Firewood in Morocco is scarce and expensive, so loaves are carried to the public baker for baking. A portion of the bread he keeps to sell as his fee for baking. There are a number of shaded streets in the bazaars. They are generally covered with palm branches or with reeds and grass laid upon trellises. The souk of the shoemakers is one of these cool streets that is protected from the African sun. This tiny cubbyhole is both workshop and store combined. Boys begin the learning of a trade when very young, and most of the hours of their day are spent in work. A style of hairdressing appropriate for the hot weather, and convenient for Allah when he grabs them and pulls them into heaven. They are shifting the threads for their masters, the tailors, who sew the other ends into patterns on burnouses. The burnouse is the flowing cloak-like garment worn by the Arabs of Morocco. Before leaving Rabat, we pay a visit to the Sultan's palace, one of the several residences of the man who, under the direction of the French governor, rules the once independent empire of Morocco. Descendants of the famous black soldiers of Mullah Ismail stand guard today over the palace and over the Sultan's mosque nearby. Gibraltar, the gigantic rock at the entrance to the Mediterranean, has been in the possession of Great Britain since 1704. It is the very image of an enormous lion, crouched between the Atlantic and the Mediterranean, and set there to guard the passage for its British mistress. On the pier, strange little carriages await us to take us on our tour of sightseeing. The number of soldiers and sailors recall to us that Gibraltar is one of the most important fortresses in the world and headquarters for Great Britain's Atlantic Fleet. The old Southport Gate, one of the entrances to the garrison town. Just to the right of the gate, a little cemetery where sleep some of the dead of the great Battle of Trafalgar. The inner Waterport Gate stands on the site of the old Moorish wall, and through this gate we pass to enter the town. Waterport Street, the main business thoroughfare, is a veritable paradise for shoppers. Almost every shop on both sides of the entire length of the street caters to the tourists with wares from all over the world. The hucksters who supply the families of the town are Spaniards. They come from the farms that are just beyond the neutral ground, which divides the British possession from the Spanish mainland. The milk trade is also in the hands of these same Spaniards. Gibraltar's water supply is somewhat restricted. The rainwater collected on the rock and stored in cisterns is sold by the government for 1 cent a keg at the tap, the cost to the consumer varying according to the distance he lives from the water station. Our stay in Gibraltar is a short one. We leave now and go on into Spain. Algiers, for over 3 centuries, was the stronghold of those terrors of the sea, the Algerian pirates. But now, under the French, it is known as the Paris of North Africa. The old Arab city and the French one which surrounds it rise directly from the shores of the harbor. Over a pontoon bridge, we walk ashore and climb the ramp above the harbor warehouses. Halfway up, we come upon a group of Bedouins from the desert, huddled together, waiting for a bus to carry them to their homes in southern Algeria. Fine buildings face the harbor along the Boulevard Carnot and the Boulevard de la République. The Rue du Constantine is but one of the imposing streets in the European quarter. Along some of the streets, arcaded sidewalks have been built under the buildings, affording shelter to pedestrians from rain or from the hot African sun. The Mosque Jama el-Jadid in the Place du Gouvernement, like all other mosques in Algiers, may be visited by unbelievers. Buses roll in from everywhere, and they are loaded to capacity, for the Arabs have succumbed to our craze for speed. A seat on top is preferable to one inside. A sheikh from the desert takes in the sight. Muslim women still wear the veil in Algiers and run for cover when the evil eye, our camera, appears. Little is necessary for the barber's shop. A chair, a razor, and a victim are all that he needs. From the sound of it, being shaved must be a painful operation. The barber is also a dentist, as his extraction signifies. From the Kasbah, the old fortress, and one-time residence of the Turkish rulers, we descend through the Kasbah quarter. The coffee house is the Arab's club. He spends many hours each day playing cards or dominoes, or just walking through Many of these streets are just long series of steps. All of them are narrow and winding. If a new house is built in this quarter, all the material must be carried in and out on the backs of donkeys. for the streets are too narrow for any but four-footed truckies. Over some of the streets, the upper stories of the houses meet, and many others have overhanging second floors. At the bottom of the hill, we leave these crowded, narrow streets to return to our ship and continue eastward on our way. From the gardens laid out upon the bastion of Barracas Superiore, we look down upon the Columbus at anchor in the grand harbor of Valletta. The royal gate and the walls of Valletta were erected by Jean de la Valette in 1566 to fortify the new capital of the Maltese Knights. Malta is another of Great Britain's naval bases and is the seat of the Commander-in-Chief of the Mediterranean forces. The Maltese have changed much since the coming of the English in 1814. The faldetta, the peculiar black headdress of the women, is the sole relic of the old national costume. But the method of the house-to-house milk delivery has remained unchanged. The supply is guaranteed to be fresh. This housewife lowers a container in a basket on a string and saves herself a trip to the street. Twice a day, in early morning and in late afternoon, the goats are driven through the streets and milked. At sunset, we bid farewell to the city of the Knights of St. John to continue on our way southward toward the Libya of the ancients. We pay a brief visit to Tripolitania, Italy's only colony in North Africa, a possession that is nearly all desert, with but a narrow strip of fertile land along the coast. Italo Balbo, who led the squadron of planes from Rome to Chicago, is now governor of this tiny colony. Much of the picturesqueness of the old city of Tripoli has disappeared in the building of the new Italian one, so we make our stop but a short one and continue on our way to the east. After 3 days of restful sailing, we come on deck in time to see the early morning mist below the mountains of Lebanon. We are at Beirut, the chief seaport of Syria. Our own ship's boats carry us ashore and land us at the custom jetty. The Syria no longer belongs to Turkey, but is under the mandate of France. Thus the law in the new Turkey forbidding the wearing of fezzes has not deprived these Turkish boatmen of their most picturesque article of dress. Beirut is the starting point of our 2-hour motor drive over the mountains of Lebanon to visit Damascus, said to be the oldest city in the world. Our first impression is one of a modern city, but this illusion soon disappears as we step 10 paces away from the Sarai Square. Among the first unusual characters that catch our eye is the vendor of sweet water. There are many of these watermen about, carrying large glass jars of colored liquid and clapping together the little brass bowls that advertise their presence. This man is cooking titbits of goat over a charcoal fire. They are hardly sanitary, but no doubt to the Syrians very delicious. In this country where it seldom rains, everything is sold in the open. Here is a cart full of dates, for flies as well as for humans, and a donkey load of cheap soap. Syrian oranges are delicious, and they are sold very cheaply, 3 or 4 cents for a dozen large ones. As you notice, they are sold by weight, not by piece. These headdresses remind us of biblical characters. A new prayer rug from Persia. This is a novel way to display a rug. He is an auctioneer, and he calls for bids as he walks through the streets, with a rug over his shoulders. Damascus is at the end of the caravan routes from Persia and Mesopotamia. All day long, trains of camels, bearing wares from the east, enter the city and trail through the We are amazed at some of the burdens we see on the backs of men and beasts alike. We stop to look in at a Damascene bakery. The oven is of clay, rounded and hollow. In the bottom, the baker puts some straw, which burns with a clean fire, and heats the inside of the clay. He then takes a small piece of dough, and by twirling it, stretches it to the size of an enormous pancake. This he places on a round pillow, which he puts into the oven. A slight pat against the inside makes the dough adhere to the walls, and the pillow is removed. The bread, when baked, is placed upon the counter, ready for a purchaser. Nearby is a bread merchant who sells not only stacks of flat bread, but many other kinds as well. High above some of the streets, Arched metal roofs have been built. One of these streets is familiar to us all. This is the biblical street called Straight, where it is recorded Saul, after 3 days of blindness, received again his sight at the hands of Ananias. The faithful remove their shoes upon entering a mosque and bathe their feet at the fountains within the court before praying. In the early evening, men gather to sit before the coffee houses and smoke. In this small kitchen, the coffee is brewed. On a shelf over the stove are kept the pipes which men rent. The tobacco is in the top of the pipe and is kept burning with a piece of charcoal. The smoke passes through the water and is cooled before being taken into the mouth. We must leave these Damascans to whom time means little and hurry on to our next country, Palestine.